Great. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. This is Heather Higginbottom, and I'm very grateful to all of you for taking time out of your schedules to spend a bit of time going through our quarterly performance review for the second quarter, as well as to get some updates on some issues that we're working on. Just to give you a sense of the rhythm or the tempo that we'd like to have with this group of people, I'll talk in a moment about a revised process for quarterly performance that we have been putting together and implementing with the global management team. And it would be my objective to, on a regular basis, after the GMT has prepared and reviewed its performance, to share that out with this group, to get into some of the discussion and some of the action items that were identified in the GMT discussions, and be able to really share where we think we're making great progress, where we may need to adjust or shift our strategy, and where we need to bear down. So we'll do at the very end of this conversation, Beth is going to share a little survey around, and if you'll take a couple moments, it's very short and quick. We'd also like to get your feedback on the format and how this conversation goes. I say conversation, but really in this particular meeting, I'm going to do a lot of talking, as are a couple of our colleagues. One of the things that we'll want to try to explore is how much of a discussion we can actually have in this format going forward. So just to say at the outset, this is a lot of presentation, and I'll be interested in your feedback in the future of whether and how we should try to have an actual discussion. We've got some GMT members who are on the call this morning, and I appreciate that very much. Certainly, if I abuse any of your work here and any of our review, please speak up. But I think we've got a pretty good deck that was circulated ahead of time that we'll go through. And Beth, you can start the slides. So first, just to give you a sense of what's guiding our thinking on the performance management and strategy. We have spent a considerable amount of time trying to align our planning processes, our budgeting process, as well as our performance process. And we really want these to be iterative and aligned. We also are looking for ways to make the process lighter and easier. And I don't think we have succeeded fully there, and I'm sure many of you would agree, but in fact, that is the objective. Next slide, please. We really want to have a deliberate and regular process to review our performance, and we are doing it with our global team, and we want to share that out with you. And that's something that we want to be repeatable and predictable, and also a process that will improve over time. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to go through every slide that was in the pre-read. I just want to really be clear about why we're doing this and what we hope to get out of it. So obviously, we want to ensure that we're aligned to our strategy. We want to know how we're utilizing our resources and if it's effective and if we're reaching our goals of greater impact. We want to be transparent, and we want to be sure that people who need to know how we're doing and how we're shifting have that information, and that we're sharing it in a common way. Next slide, please. So the way we proceeded and the process that we've put in place is to, on a quarterly basis, convene 3 different groups of GMT members. One around programs and impact, reviewing our progress on bold moves 1, 3, and 5. One on resource and engagement, reviewing progress on bold moves 2 and 4. And a third group on operations, people, and systems. One that is a group that's focused on our organizational pillars, as well as our customer relationship management program. So this actually was a very good process in terms of the conversations we had and the approach. It's something that we'll continue doing. And so I just mentioned that because I think it's a good way, if any of you have particular issues of concern around these bold moves or the performance, you can see who the chairs of these groups are, and of course can reach out to those folks. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go through in the next 15 minutes or so a bit more detail of the quarterly performance in the second quarter, but I thought it would be good to really have the big decisions that these were the issues that really rose to the surface, in our conversations. We decided other things, but these are the big 4 decisions. So one, we all agreed that we really need to make an organizational priority of our impact measurement and program quality work. This is clearly in our strategy. This is something we're focused on, but there was a sense, as we've done with other priorities for the organization, that we really elevate and highlight this and work across functions to make progress in the remainder of FY18, but also as we go into the planning process for FY19. Second, we came to the conclusion that our separate strategies around fundraising engagement, advocacy, constituency building needs to come together, be aligned, and have an overarching engagement strategy. So instead of thinking about who we're trying to reach for fundraising, who we're trying to reach for advocacy, we bring that together in an umbrella fashion. And we've seen some progress that other organizations, including IRC, have made in this area, and it's made a big difference in terms of the efficacy of their messaging as well as fundraising. We also talked about the need to define the return on increasing the investment in our mass market fundraising, which is something that we've been decreasing in the last couple of years. And then finally, we talked a lot about some of the major pain points in our HR policies and practices, and really want to bear down on whether we need to, whether and how to make an investment in those that could be could really be improve ease of use and also reduce our risk with some of our systems. Next slide, please. This is an important issue, and I would love to engage the group on this question. We are really, really good as an organization at identifying new initiatives or priorities, and we're a lot less good at figuring out what we should stop doing, or what not. I shouldn't say that we're not good at what could we do differently, but we need to have a very thoughtful conversation around what could we do differently that would reduce the burden that people have day to day, and enable us to have more capacity to take on priorities such as those I've just mentioned. And I think as a global management team, we're wrestling with coming up with the things to stop doing, and we have acknowledged that we haven't been very good at it. And so Michelle's challenge to us is to really figure out where we're not, what things are we doing that aren't adding value, and how to identify those and reduce our work on them so we have capacity for other issues. Next slide, please. So this, I won't go through this particular table, but this just sums up sort of where we are across the bold moves in Q2. This is aligned, I am sure you're all familiar with the strategy tracker that we've developed, and that's these ratings come from that strategy tracker. And I'll say about that, a common theme of our discussions around the Q2 performance was that we need to continue to improve and enhance that tracker to make sure we're measuring the right things, but we are going to continue to use that, and we do want to make improvements to that. So if you have particular thoughts that you want to raise up your chains of command, please do that, because this is going to be a tool that evolves but will be important to our measuring progress in this process. Next slide, please. I apologize, I'm not doing my own slides. It must be annoying to hear that. So in bold move 1, I'm not going to go through all of the detail here. What I'd like to focus on each of these is really the actions. So if you could just advance one more, Beth. So we had a good discussion around the impact growth strategies, which is what we were looking at in this bold move. And I think while there's been good progress, it's been differentiated a little bit based on region for various reasons, and that's listed in the misses. But there was a focus on how do we evolve these going forward? When do we identify when something's not working? How do we allow space for other initiatives to emerge? And that will be a piece of work that goes forward. We also talked about the importance we celebrate the successes of our global advocacy work, which is impressive and exciting, but we also want to step back and say, we have now people across the organization who identify themselves as having a role in advocacy. And what are we doing, and how can we advance that engagement to really multiply our impact? So I'm not going to go through all the detail. You have it and you can read it. I'm just going to do highlights of each one. Next slide, please. So our humanitarian priority is very important. We're pleased to have Shiva Crocker as our VP for Humanitarian, and the work that she's doing. Really, the remainder of this fiscal year and into next year is about defining what the path looks like for us in this space. And a big aspect of that is engaging with our country offices and with our regional platforms to understand the needs that are arising, how we can leverage what we have, and how, very importantly, can we raise additional resources to meet the critical needs that exist. Next slide. So bold move 3, pioneer the metrics of continual progress and accountability. This is, as I said at the outset, an area we had very, very focused and important discussion. How do we elevate this critical need that is felt across the organization into the priority that people feel that it is, with attention, focus, and really making the progress that we need. We have Jamie, of course, Jamie Tersey leading on this effort. But what we've committed to is a strong effort across functions, because this is not just a PPL endeavor. This is something that we need to leverage the knowledge and the capacity, obviously, of our country offices, of our RMUs, that cuts across programming areas from advocacy all the way. So this is a lot of work and a lot of focus to be done. We have made some progress, and it's important to recognize that, but I think our conclusion was we want to do a lot more. This is something that comes up in conversations all the time as a felt need, and we're committed to elevating it as a priority and making progress in the rest of FY18 and certainly into 19. And bold move 5, we had a really interesting conversation. We talked about some of the very good progress that's been made when you look at what we're measuring and what we're trying to do. But we also recognize that we need to not step back, not step back from the work, but step back and reflect a little bit on where we are, what we're seeing, what we're learning, and what that means to our work going forward. So we've had a lot of evolution in the model, and what are we learning from that? Do we need to kind of bear down on what that means in terms of how we engage, how we support what our model looks like? So we're going to be focusing on that next step of the open operating model. Transforming our operating model. And that's an exciting piece of work, but I think we felt like while there's progress, we need to better understand where we're going. Next slide, please. So on the bold move 2, which is of course about resourcing the fight against poverty, the first element here is U.S. government funding, and everyone on this call is familiar with the proposed cuts to the budget, and the advocacy fight there continues, and we've so far made good progress, and we'll continue to fight that battle and knock on wood at the same time. But one thing that's happened in the first half of this fiscal year is that USAID in particular has been very slow to issue requests for proposals, and therefore we have not been able to apply for many as we would hope to that were in our plan. And we've also, of course, been impacted by the reinstatement and expansion of the global gag rule. Our hope and our expectation, based on conversations with USAID, are that they will step up the tempo at which they release proposals in the second half of this year, and we will ensure that we have capacity to respond to those. But it's an important area for us to stay focused on, and we're also undertaking some work to identify those offices, country offices most dependent on USG funding that could be impacted. And also, this is probably obvious to everyone on this call, but that would not impact the USG funding that we might receive in this fiscal year, because we would have applied for that previously. It's really about going into the beginning of FY19. Next slide, please. You can skip through that. So on the private fundraising, we should celebrate a really important milestone here. First of all, for FY18, we had very large increases in our budget for both unrestricted and restricted private fundraising. And in the first half of the fiscal year, we met and slightly exceeded our unrestricted private fundraising goal. And that's a very big accomplishment given how big that growth was. In fact, in the first half of the fiscal year, we raised more unrestricted private dollars than all of FY17. So it's a huge accomplishment, and the team should be celebrated for that. And we've also been ahead of plan on our foundations and corporations, in large part because of the Gates Foundation grant. But we have continued for the rest of the fiscal year large goals. And as we have instituted a new process to really examine our pipelines and see where we are in the process, I think it's possible that we'll come up a bit short on the unrestricted revenue, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And also, we're going to come up short likely in our restricted proposals from private fundraising. So what we need to do is really understand the implications of the restrictedness, and also figure out how we can manage if we do have a shortfall on the unrestricted private giving. So if you could go to the next slide, Beth, and just one more down. Maybe it's at the very end. It is at the very end. I apologize, but you'll see. It's okay. It's okay. You can leave it there. You'll see that at the very end, when we have the financial update, you can see we think we may be about $3 million short in private unrestricted revenue, and we have savings from the first half of the fiscal year of a little over $1 million. And we're going through a process now to determine what of that we can lock in, so to speak, as well as look at the second half of the fiscal year and where we may be able to reduce some expenses. And so while that's a reality that we're dealing with, it's also important to put it in the context of just how ambitious our growth plan was for private fundraising in this fiscal year, and to be very appreciative that we are where we are so far, and the team is continuing its work and its tempo. So I spent a little bit more time on that, but I just wanted to be sure people had the context for particularly how we'll go into the second half of the fiscal year. Okay, Beth, you can go down. On the Campaign for Good, which, as you know, is our plan, is our initiative to raise $2 billion over the next few years. We put this graphic together just to show where we are. We've raised $576 million towards that $2 billion target. That includes USG funding, foundations, corporations, private giving, et cetera. So we're about 29% of the way towards our goal. Next, please. So bold move 4, grow a movement through the power of story and engagement. I mentioned one of the important outcomes at the beginning was we really need an all-encompassing engagement strategy that we can pull together and put as an umbrella over our work, advocacy, fundraising, and other types of engagement. And that will be a big focus of work going forward. I think it'll also unlock what we view as an important priority, which is continuing the effort to bring the stories from our work around the world directly to our target audiences in a more effective way. And we're working through that. John Aylward, our Chief Marketing Officer, and his team are working, and will do so in a cross-functional way to figure out how we can improve that. So this slide talks some about our advocacy work, which has been quite successful, but we really do feel the need to have this sort of overarching engagement strategy. Next slide, please. On our customer relationship management system, CRM, which is as I'm sure most people are aware, is our effort to put together, first for fundraising, but a knowledge management platform that we can use across the organization. And this is for FY18 a big commitment of investment, and a lot of work has gone into it. And this is a really good news story so far. Again, I'm knocking on wood, but this is ahead of schedule and under budget. And the minimum viable product that's been developed is on track for an April launch, and the team has been able to identify savings from the project that are able to be returned and used for other purposes. So this is a good news story, but we still have some risks that we identified, just not to get caught up in all the good news. We have to keep the focus here to manage this successfully, but this has been a highlight. Next slide, please. On people, leadership, and culture, I kind of read the headline at the outset, which is a real felt need that we need to deal with some of our systems that hold us back. With the breach of our system last October, we've identified other risks in our systems, and this is something that we really want to dig in on and see what we could do, how it could transform how we work, what it would cost. In addition to that, we recognize that we have to just improve the basics in people and culture, and Mare Sport has been bringing a lot of good progress in that space, but we recognize we have more to do. So this will be a continued focused area for us. And then on the digital strategy, I'll just sort of say where we are on this in the following ways. We have big ambitions to tackle some very important issues with our digital strategy. ICT for development, how we can be more engaged in supporting country offices and regions by bringing in fellows and deploying resources. But we have a lot of infrastructure challenges to deal with, from cybersecurity and data security to simply internet connectivity and better video conferencing. And so we know clearly, I think, what the work is in the short term, and we've had some good success. Whether it's CRM or responding very quickly on the cyber front, we have a lot more work to do. And so we're going to continue to develop those plans and engage with leaders across the organization to figure out how best to try to make progress on the digital front, not just in infrastructure, but in other ways that we can bring technology and expertise to further our impact. Next slide. Are we at the end? Oh. Okay, I think that may be the last slide. So it's a lot of talking presentation. You can read the details in there. And I would love to, oh yeah, there's a couple more slides that you can take a look at, but I think I've covered everything. This is really an opportunity for people to know where the global management team is headed in terms of the rest of the fiscal year. But I think it's also an opportunity for people to identify with their managers, with their teams, other issues that you think we're not capturing or not addressing. And so we have not set up this call as that format. I think that would be a little challenging to do, though we'll explore it going forward. But I would encourage you through your managers or directly with me to raise issues you think we're just sort of missing the boat on. And so that's an open invitation moving forward. And I will pause there, Beth, and hand it back to you. Thank you so much for advancing the slides. And I think next we are going to hear from Eric and Mare.
Heather, while I pull up Eric's presentation and unmute his line, would you say just a few words about how our status at Q2 FY18 is informing the FY19 planning process?
Thank you for the prompt, Beth. I was supposed to do that. So it's a very important issue. So as I mentioned, we really want the planning, budget, and performance review process to align and be iterative. So we, as a global management team, actually started the FY19 process with the Q2 results. We had this conversation and we said, how does that take us into 19? And what do we need to start, stop, and continue? And how do we ensure that, our performance and this type of review is informing our choices going forward? We are also endeavoring to do a better job of aligning requests to country offices, RMUs, et cetera, with our planning and budgeting process so that they are more reflective in the decisions that get made around resources, and that we have our regional directors in particular participating fully in that process, to include a lot of conference calls and a week-long meeting in Atlanta next month that we will use to ensure we're having cross-functional conversations, and that we are not making planning and budgeting decisions in isolation, so that it's reflecting our performance, that it's done on a global basis, and that aligns with processes that currently exist in country offices and RMUs. And I doubt we've got it perfect. I am sure we need to continue to perfect that, but that is our objective. Over to you, Beth.
Great. Eric, I am working on pulling up that slide, but your line should be unmuted.
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Good. Hi, everyone. Hope everyone is well, and thanks, Heather, for that good summary of where we are relating to the strategy and the efforts relating to it. An area that we wanted to take a little bit of time to share now, in addition to, in some ways, I'll use the analogy of offense, where Heather's been talking about what the organization is doing, our goals, our strategies, et cetera. An important element of course, what we do and who we are is how we play defense. And really what I mean by that is of course, how we approach, how we view, how we prioritize, and how we manage the risk areas that we face day to day. And I have to say, that I think, of course, we do this every day, every one of us in our contexts, and each one of our contexts and our areas of influence are different, and risk is something that is undoubtedly a contextual exercise. And so, there's a lot of what CARE has done in recent years that has really perfected risk management. I mean, one example that I'd say is the use of the risk registers as part of the compliance program, where CARE, as acknowledged by a board member recently, is really embarking on and perfecting a process of really what kind of blue chip enterprise risk management looks like at any business. And so that's an example of the types of intentionality, the types of reporting, et cetera, that we all do every day at different levels. At a high level and at a GMT and in part informed by the board level, we embark, as you maybe saw in the pre-reads, on kind of an annual review or assessment of what do we really need to be thinking about, what keeps us up at night, what is most concerning to us, and how do we need to be managing those areas as an organization, and ensuring the appropriate levels of transparency about that process and how we're managing those areas. And so what happened at an enterprise risk level, at a high level, and this is kind of GMT level, and the reason why we're sharing is how we're kind of together as an organization and how we manage these risks, is over the last couple of months, including discussions with the board in early February, we arrived at a series of priorities. And we've done this every year to say, these are the things that we really need to keep an eye on. These are the things that we really need to, as an organization, make sure that we move the needle on. Beth, you may be still looking for that summary slide.
It'll be showing in just a moment.
That's great. Thank you. So where we came down on that deliberative process that we did over the last couple of months is around 3 priorities. The first being, Heather mentioned the cyber incident that we had in October. It highlighted a number of things that are of importance to us as an organization. That area, and if you look at this slide that was coming up, that's the slide highlighted in blue, that area, it remains a priority for us, and there is a plan in formation. It's largely done, but a plan in formation to help us manage that there will be an impact on eventually there'll be an impact on everyone. And so cyber data security and privacy is a key area. Another area that we highlighted, and this relates to the revenue of CARE and our presence in country and our ability to achieve our values and our mission, it relates to the issue of EU eligibility, as well as U.S. government funding restrictions that impact our work, and that's areas like the Mexico City policy, global gag rule, and the impact on CARE. So that we view that as a high-risk area, as an area that is important to track and monitor, in an area that has a plan, certainly for the countries who are involved in piloting and in kind of a step up in those activities to ensure eligibility. But that's an important priority. The third priority, which I'll turn over shortly to Made, relates to sexual harassment, exploitation, and abuse. And I'll let her share a little bit more. Certainly that area has been, in the news a lot lately, and Mare can share that more in a second. Just to give you an idea, here you see the risk universe that we talked about. All of these areas are important when you look at the bucketing of strategic, people, operational capabilities, financial, et cetera. The other areas that we noted and that we will track using metrics to make sure that we're doing what we need to do in those areas are those highlighted in the orange color. So impact measurement, subrecipient accountability, monitoring, et cetera, staff safety and security, fraud. Those are not on the top tier of areas that we have a real, very intentional effort at. But those are areas that still will get significant attention and certainly visibility from a metric standpoint, so that we're clear on how the organization as a whole is doing. The other areas that are highlighted in yellow here, tan, are areas that are important to us, that are kind of more strategic, more appropriate for just kind of ongoing management, day-to-day types of tracking. These will be are frankly part of kind of ongoing discussions day-to-day. But I wanted to share this broader kind of spectrum of CARE USA's approach from an Atlanta standpoint and enterprise standpoint, and the potential implications certainly for those highlighted in blue, as well as those in yellow, to be something that country offices and other business units are asked to step up and engage on in a more intentional way. And I'd argue that in all of those areas, those have already been underway, and in fact, some of those in orange have been risk priorities for CARE USA, and we're maintaining the visibility of them. So on that high level, after that high level introduction, I'd pass the baton to Made to talk a bit more about the important area of sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment that we're focusing a lot of time on these days.
Thank you, Eric. Just checking with everyone, you can hear me well. So I think, as you know, some months ago, we were really prioritizing the strengthening of our policies internally on sexual harassment and externally, now with our relationship with our program participants on our policy on prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse and child protection. And this is a policy that was a international policy that was first released on 2009, and then in 2017 we really enhanced the elements of the policy, including child protection. So no discussion in the last days or weeks, as you know there is a lot of media attention on the Oxfam crisis, and although we don't want to say we start this process, due to that, we can say that we really want to accelerate and put much more attention and probably much more sense of urgency on strengthening our internal processes, protocols, mechanisms globally and more consistently. So what I can say, I mean, having been in country office and in the regional roles before, we know that some countries have a strong and very robust processes, culture, dialogue about this, and not necessarily in all the countries happen the same. So our approach will be to make sure that we have minimum standards to everyone and be able to bring the resources and the support every country and every division and every part of care can be able really to have to be able to apply this policy fully on board. So no discussion for me, policies can be, enhanced and applied in a mechanisms of policing, or can be part of our culture. So what we want is really the second. We want to make sure that these policies can bring a clear space for us on dialogue of our values, our GED principles, our DNA need to be really focused on respect, on dignity, and the way we act in every place that we are. So 4 things that we are going to do, and we're going to follow up with each of you in the country office and in the U.S. about the things that we're moving forward. We have put a team together, but there are 4 areas that we are going to work strongly on. Definitely awareness and training for us, for our partners, for the participants. Enhance really community-based mechanisms for reporting. So the hotline is important, but not definitely for or easy for, especially program participants to use. Strengthen our internal capacity for investigations, and especially these kind of investigations that are very complex, very sensitive, and we have some plans about that. And finally, something that we didn't have done really fully in the past is have a program for the victims. There is a lot in each of these 4 areas, but in terms of timing, I just want to make sure that we are focused on those, and we are going to work strongly with each of you to make them a reality. Pass it back to Beck, but maybe the last thing I want to say is that we want to also move much more on transparency. We are going to, share a little bit more about what we are doing on this front, and in terms of references and dialogue about the people that work for us and used to work for us is something that we're exploring, how we can be able to collaborate much more between the NGO community, and this is a conversation that is going on at this moment, even at the policy level.
Thank you, Made. Heather, ready to turn it over to Global Advocacy?
That sounds great, Beth.
Sarah, are you on the line?
I am, thank you.
I'll advance the slides for you, Sarah.
Thanks so much, Beth. And Mari, thank you. That's actually a perfect segue regarding the policy environment for this very topical issue. I wanted to just take the opportunity to share with all of you our work on the Global Advocacy team around an ILO convention on ending sexual harassment and violence in the workplace. You can advance the slide. This is the first time that CARE has been able to really leverage its entire network. We've been working with all CARE member partners and the Secretariat in a real collaborative way, and I'm really pleased to share with you some of the plans for this campaign. It's important to note that we started this campaign over a year ago in terms of planning, and so of course our external environment has changed quite a bit since then. While the public launch of the campaign timeline may change given the nature of the content, I wanted to make sure everybody knew that the advocacy work will press on. And it's important to really think about what we bring to this conversation, both as it affects, of course, our own sector, but certainly also affects all of the people that we work alongside. Particularly, the impact growth strategy teams have spent the last few years thinking about how they can work for the women in Asia and Latin America, both thinking about domestic workers in Latin America and workers' rights in Asia. But there is work in the impact growth strategies in the Middle East, particularly in Egypt and to some degree in the Great Lakes around this topic as well. And so we're pulling on our depth of experience on this issue and thinking about ways that we can contribute to a global effort that has been, for some groups, part of their mission for 30 years plus, to see this ILO convention coming in the next conference, which starts in June. So I'll take you through a little bit of what that looks like. I know it's a complicated process, but just wanted to give everybody an update on sort of the state of play and what we can bring to this effort. The next slide, please. So knowing that this will contribute to 2 of our outcome area goals around women's economic empowerment and a life free from violence, and drawing on at least 2 of our impact growth strategies, we've embarked on this global campaign with a goal of achieving a new ILO convention with associated recommendations, which is really a binding treaty. It's the most comprehensive way that we can address this issue, and what they call a standard setting process, which means that there will, for the first time, be a comprehensive standard at the international level, which countries can then draw on that language to set their own policies. In some cases, for example, in the U.S., where the U.S. government may not typically ratify an ILO convention, state law often draws from ILO language. So, for example, where countries are ratifying the ILO Convention 189 around domestic workers, in this country, New York and Illinois have created state law based on that convention around the domestic workers' rights. So we can see how the ILO, and I should say that's the International Labor Organization, which is part of the UN agency cluster, how an ILO convention could have impact across both the global north and the global south. Our objectives are to convince at least 6 governments, this is for CARE in particular, 2 in the global north and 4 in the global south, 4 companies and 2 unions to actively support this convention on GBV in the workplace. And that's important because many of you know that the ILO is actually a tripartite, which means that government, employers, and employees have a say in what comes out in the language of this convention. So our work has expanded to think beyond just our government advocacy, but also our advocacy with employee unions, as well as employers and our corporate partners. And I want to thank Marcella Hahn in particular for being a great partner in this as we think about new ways to explore our advocacy with our corporate partners. By 2020, we also hope that we can advance the participation of women in the ILO process, and would love to give a shout out to Leslie and Navraj in the Asia region who've been doing a lot of great work in involving the ILO and their impact growth strategies work, as well as Tatiana in the LAC region for their work and including the ILO at the local and national level, and giving our partners a voice in that process. By 2020, CARE also would like to secure policy wins, of course. That would mean that the convention has been passed, and for us, what we're hoping for in the language in particular is that women, of course, there's a gender dimension here, are included as part of them, and those who are the most marginalized, and that we include the informal work sector as we think about the definition of the workplace. So, of course, people like working in homes with domestic workers in particular. Thanks, Beth. The opportunities, of course, are all about multiplying impact. From our perspective, we will bring evidence to policymakers, again, directly from our programs. There will be several reports that are being launched in March. One of them is on the cost of violence. Another one that Brian Fagans is working on as a result of a Harris poll that he conducted across several different countries. And I'm working with Eric Johnson on a legal analysis in 20 countries through a new partnership with DLA Piper, which will give CARE offices a step up in understanding what is the policy analysis that they need to understand, both the current landscape as well as some of the gaps in their own national context. We talked a bit about media partnerships. Want to thank John Aylward's team, Heidi Natkin and Simon in particular, for Simon Duncan Watt, for helping us think about how to leverage the relationship with Porter Novelli, a pro bono PR firm that's helped us bring these stories to life and help us contribute to our advocacy goals. And of course, working and connecting, convening, and strengthening our work with movements. There are several of which we are engaging in different parts of the world. ITUC, of course, is the largest employee representative in the union space. Global Citizen is now interested. Maria Rouhani has just brought in the U.S. The Coalition of Immokalee Workers, which are a farmers movement, as well as 9to5.org, which is a really powerful movement organizer in the U.S. So this gives you a sense of the overall strategy. This is borrowed from John Aylward's team, and I think does a really nice job of sort of highlighting for you what the strategy looks like. We intend to launch this campaign in March with the March for Women. And by doing so, we'll really bring a lot of attention to our efforts globally. The month of action, many of you have heard about in your work, is really an opportunity to just stand in solidarity with women around the world. It'll take shape in different ways depending on what makes sense for your own context. But there is an opportunity to be really active in terms of your engagement with your stakeholders, to do advocacy or fundraise. There are toolkits which I can share with you after this call that have been developed, strategy plans, policy briefs. There's a ton of information for you to plug in if you haven't had access to it already. But essentially there will be ongoing efforts through International Women's Day. There are events. Walk in Her Shoes is happening in different countries all over the world. And the hope is that for whatever way is appropriate for your country context, you can engage and have a conversation around gender broadly. If it works for you to engage on this campaign, particularly around harassment in the workplace, we're asking for you to consider joining the advocacy efforts. The Porter Novelli team came up with this really provocative hashtag, "This is not working." Of course, the double entendre in English gives us an opportunity to really engage people in a way that really helps them share their own story or their own observations about the issue of harassment in the workplace. The media team has curated 31 days of content for the month of March. There will be digital and social media assets that everyone can utilize, and we're hoping that we can really break through at a very timely moment before this convention debate starts at the end of May. May 28th is the day of the conference in Geneva. So our goal is to build that drumbeat between March and May. And I've put on here the different folks who are engaged in leading this effort. We encourage you to get involved, reach out to us, let us know how we can help support your efforts. I'm really pleased to say that we have 20 different care country offices who are engaged in this effort, both in the global north and the global south. And we're hearing about more and more every day, which is really quite exciting. Again, the campaign strategy is something that I've been working a lot on with Glenn Tarman, who's the head of global advocacy at the Secretariat, and Alice Allen in her role leading the women's economic empowerment work out of Care UK. And then there are several of us who are engaged in supporting this and making this come together. On the March for Women side, the lead is Shabi Amini from Care UK as her role is in the SLT for CI, and John Aylward, of course, is our representative on that SLT, and his team has done an amazing amount of work pulling together really high quality creative for this campaign. So it is truly a group effort, and would really love your active engagement as we launch this in March and press forward over the next 3 years to see this convention through in 2020. I just wanted to take a moment to ask David to just share with you what many of you have been reading in the news around U.S. government budget and the Trump budget that just came out, and give you a sense of where our team has been focusing our efforts. So just a few more minutes if you can spare the time, and I'll ask David to walk through it.
Perfect. Okay. So sorry about that. But quickly before we go into the budget piece, I just wanted to acknowledge the great work that Sarah's done in working with our colleagues around throughout the world in Care International to bring this to life. And we've aspired as a confederation for years to do this kind of global campaign, and we're actually finally doing it, and that's exciting, and all the more exciting because of the focus of this work. So I do hope everyone will take the opportunity to figure out how they can participate and help to bring this to life over the next 3 years. So on to the budget. As Sarah said, I think probably all of you know that the U.S. foreign aid budget is under threat, has been since the President Trump assumed office a little over a year ago. The more immediate news is that given the kind of idiosyncrasies of the U.S. federal government budget process and the inability of the U.S. Congress to actually function in normal order, we're dealing with budgets for 2 federal fiscal years, the current year, FY18, as well as the upcoming FY19 year. And at the same time, the President has proposed his FY19 budget. It's important to understand that in the U.S. system, it's actually Congress that passes the budget. So the President can propose what he wants, but ultimately it's Congress who will say yay or nay to that. And the President has proposed substantial cuts, as well as in the recent budget deal in Congress, there have been some substantial cuts proposed. So this is all playing out over the next about 3 to 4 weeks. We are putting everything we've got behind the fight to restore funding and to ensure that we come out of this with levels of funding that are roughly equal to what we've had in fiscal year 17. We're leading a coalition of NGOs to fight this. We know that we're getting breakthrough to Congress. The leadership there has let us know that they've been hearing from us, and we've been rallying our citizen advocates from around the country to speak to their members of Congress on this effort. So I'm hopeful, but we still have a lot of work to do over the next several weeks, and we will keep you all posted as events unfold.
Thank you so much, David and Sarah. Thank you to Mare and Eric as well for your presentations. We're just about at time, and so I think we should wrap up the call, but I want to, again, thank all of you for participating. I do hope that this is a useful conversation and one that we can continue on a quarterly basis, and we do look forward to your feedback on the format and the content of the call. And so, Beth, I'll let you do the housekeeping to close us up in terms of the survey. But again, thanks very much to all of you, and look forward to engaging on a regular basis going forward.
This is Beth. Thank you all for participating. And what we're going to do, because I think about half of the participants are using their phone or not at a laptop, I will send out to everyone who was invited a link to a recording of this meeting, as well as a link to a survey just to get your feedback on how helpful this conversation or this briefing was, and the format we can adapt moving forward.
Good. Thanks, Beth, and thanks everyone very much.
Thank you.